Hello, class. We are going to talk a little bit today about metals, nonmetals, and metalloids and how to find them on the periodic table. So the first big key is that on the periodic table, typically it's kind of shown on this one in particular with a little kind of bold line, and we're just going to color that as best we can so that we can see where it is. And that bold line goes right along in between here. So it kind of starts on top of aluminum and then zigzags down to the bottom. Sometimes it's called the zigzag, staircase. I usually call it the staircase, but any of those names are just fine. So we're just going to draw that in right here. And it zigzags down all the way to the side of polonium, and we're going to stop there. I'm going to change it so it's a little bit easier to see. Make it kind of a bright green color. You can choose whatever color you like, as long as it's something that you can see and find relatively easily. So there's our little zigzag line. Okay, now the general rule is that everything touching the zigzag line is supposed to be a metalloid. Now, as it turns out, it's not a perfect rule. It's just pretty good. So you're probably like, oh, well, aluminum right here is a metal. For sure, it's a metal. It's not a metalloid, even though it's touching the line. For the most part, the rest of them we're going to count as metalloids. And you notice the zigzag line kind of quits before we go to period 7 here down at the bottom. And that's because I think the elements down here last for so short a period of time, it'd be a little bit odd to call them a non-metal, a metal, or a metalloid. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a moment and we are going to label the ones that we are going to consider metalloids. And those are boron, silicon, germanium, arsenic, SB is for antimony, Te is tellurium, PO is polonium, and then At is astatine. So those are the ones we're going to count as metalloids. Depending upon who you ask, some of those may or may not count, but those are kind of the regular main ones. Here's the big rule, is that everything to the left of the staircase that's not touching it is a metal, with the exception of hydrogen. Hydrogen is also a non-metal. Everything to the right, so over here where most of the gases are non-metal. So carbon's a non-metal, sulfur's a non-metal, iodine is a non-metal. Over here, all are metals. So you've got potassium, calcium, magnesium, platinum, gold, iron, all those guys in here. Those are all going to be metals. So there's kind of your quick rule for that. Now, with that in mind, it's important to also know what metals, nonmetals, and metalloids are. I think we have talked about this a little bit in class, but I want to make sure that we have that information. So what I'd like you to do is, if you've printed your periodic table, what you're going to do is flip it over. And what I like to have you guys do is write down important information on the back of the periodic table. In this case, the important information is what's a metal, what's a non-metal, and what's a metalloid, so that you know what those things are. I've made the font kind of big so you can read it. And what I'll do is, for following videos, I'll shrink that down as we add more information. So metals, their main characteristics are that they're shiny, they are ductile and malleable, which ductile means it can be stretched into a wire. Malleable means it can be bent without breaking, which you've probably experienced or seen a little bit of. And generally speaking, they're pretty conductive, and that's both heat and electricity. Okay, so that means that nonmetals are kind of the opposite of all those things. Instead of shiny, they're going to be dull. Instead of ductile and malleable, they're brittle. And instead of being conductive, we usually call them insulators, which means that they do not allow the flow of heat or electricity very well. And now metalloids, to keep things as simple as possible, they essentially have properties between those of metals and nonmetals. So nothing special there. They're just kind of the in-between layer. Okay, so your main goals are to label the staircase, to understand that things to the left are metals and things to the right are non-metals.